In the Bag, episode 24?
Yeah, 24. And you're in a new location there, Robbie, looks like.
Yeah, for those of you who are who consume the podcast in a visual format, I am currently traveling. I'm at my parents' house for the week, hanging out. So in my dad's office, commandeering his work from home setup for the day. So yeah, we're having a good old time.
Yeah, I think it fits your vibe a little bit too. I can tell it's your dad's office, I think.
Yeah, we're a baseball family through and through. Like, I didn't understand how football worked until I moved to college, simply because we just didn't have time for other sports in our lives. It was always if it was Saturday, like really when I got to college and I realized in the South that like Saturday is college football day or Sunday is like for the NFL, that just never happened because it was like Saturday's we're at the ballpark. That's what we do. So definitely a bit different, but we're not a baseball podcast. We're a disc golf podcast, bringing it down. Yeah. And we have a fantastic guest for us today, who is one of the people who, for those of you who follow the Robbie C channel, Justin has a connection to Atlas because of the fact that we brought Justin on for his first ever tournament and filmed his entire progress. So, yeah, awesome. It should be a lot of fun if you're ready to meet him.
Yeah, I am. I'm happy to meet him. Let's bring him in.
Come on. Welcoming to the podcast, Justin. How are you doing today, man?
I'm doing well. Long time viewer, first time caller. Thanks for having me on.
Glad to have you on.
Dude, so Justin, I know you. I have the opportunity to do some lessons with your kids, part of the Birdie fam, and you've been on the channel before, but we want our audience to get to know you and get to know your game. So we have a couple questions we ask for everyone that comes on. The first being, how long have you been playing disc golf?
So seriously, since about March of 21. Before that, my brother had drugged me out a couple times, but decided to take me to the absolute worst course for a beginner. And I swore it off for about a year and a half. And then, the pandemic hit. I'm one of those guys. And I was like, we need to get out of the house. So, took the kids out and we've all been addicted ever since. My budget quadrupled when they really started playing. So, yeah, that's where I'm at.
I love it. Okay. So a little over a year, seriously. Let us know. Let's talk distance. If you're out there throwing a disc, what is your comfortable golf distance, both backhand and forehand?
I would say comfortable golf distance, controlled shot, about between 300 to 330. If I absolutely hammer it, 375, but that's like gone. I don't have control of where that one's going. Forehand, I can stretch it out to about 275. I had an injury in December and I kind of had to swear off of that one for a couple months, but it's built back up. So, comfortable 275 now.
Okay. Awesome. So, that's honestly fantastic distance for sure. And I think for lots of people listening, if they thought about throwing a disc 375 feet, for most of them, they wouldn't have any control whether it was going regardless. So I think you're going to fit in nicely with lots of our listeners in that. Let's talk putting, that short game. Right. So we line you up at the basket, 15 feet, 25 feet, 40 feet. You got 10 putters at each. How many are you making from each station?
So 15 feet is just about a tap in anymore. That's kind of where I warm up in my backyard. Of course, you can always jasper it off the cage. So I'm just going to say like 9 out of 10 on those. 25, about 60%. I can draw metal about on 90% of those. And then 40 feet, I'm going to say it's more than a hope and a prayer. I'm coming at the basket. I can probably draw metal about half the time, but I'm making like one or two of those. I'm definitely not in the dialed in. My short game is not gonna be what wins me anything.
That's fair, and that's a really good way to put it. I think another low key factor about that people don't think about when they're like sort of calculating their game is something you said in both the 25 and the 40 foot distance, is that drawing metal, because unless you're on like a dangerous sloped green or something like that, drawing metal generally means, right, like you're going to be sitting close to the basket. Obviously, there are some circumstances where you kind of don't want to draw metal at all. If you're running it, you'd
Right.
rather it just kind of sail past and settle on the hill behind it or whatever that may be. But
Yeah,
no,
and
that's fantastic. Yeah, go ahead.
I've got about I do kind of bounce between two putting styles, and that's mainly like I've got that weird Matio neck putt, spin putt kind of thing. And yeah, I've got that issue. If it goes past it, it's going to go sailing. So sometimes I'll switch up to like a step putt past on that 45-foot range, and yeah, I don't draw metal nearly as much, but it's going to land for a tap in safely.
Love it. Love it. Well, what we're going to be focused on today, Justin, we're going to be talking about your mid ranges. So we're going to come back to mid ranges in the very end of it. You have an all gyro bag, or I guess not all gyro. You have some, or maybe you do. Looking through it, do you have any streamline in here? Like, am I missing it?
So I'm testing out a streamline, but I didn't like list it in the bag. It's not
Okay,
actively in the bag. I
And he
do
does
have
have a
one
tilt too.
tilt, yeah,
Hmm.
and I
that's
bag
fair.
that
That's fair.
unironically.
So let's just dive into
Interesting.
fairways then. Let's start there. Talk me through
Yeah,
what is
let's
the
do it.
unironic use of the tilt.
It gets me out of the woods for a lot of There's some big time woods golf courses here, and if I have to put that on a thumber, I can trust it to kind of flex out and get me back in the fairway because especially if I go off to the left, I want to kick it out to the right. It gets me out there. There's one or two holes I will actually specifically throw it on, but I said I bag it unironically, but it is a laugh for my kids. I play with my kids most of the time. When I pull that disc out, they know something silly is about to happen, and so they start getting giddy. So it stays in my bag for casual rounds. It might come out for especially if I'm going to an open course. I usually won't bag that. I am that guy that kind of switches up depending on conditions and whatever course I'm on.
Okay. So something that I find interesting when we look at your bag, speaking of like switching it around, is when we talk about your distance drivers versus your fairway drivers, you have a couple discs that when you categorize them, you had them as distance drivers, and then you had others that fell into that sort of fairway driver slot. But that 9-speed area, it kind of fluctuates for you on
So
which ones fall into where.
I think that's actually I was using Disc Golf Bag Builder, and for some reason, some of their 9 speeds, that's not something I can control on that one.
Okay.
So it's not really how I view them so much as it's
Okay.
just like that's how it laid out. I don't know why it did it like that.
Okay.
So
So if you were talking distance drivers, would you say you only bagged 3 distance drivers in the Photon, the Vanish, and the Wave?
yes, yeah. I used to mess with more of them, but I realized that it's just a lot of nose angle issues I run into. If I'm going to throw an errant throw, it's with the distance driver, and I'm really concentrating more on control than I am distance anymore. That's especially after that tournament video we did. It's just I was breaking out distance drivers for way too much of that, and realized that probably half of them where I went OB was with like a distance driver, and I can shape a fairway driver like the 9 speeds a lot easier. So if I'm wide open, I'll break out my wave. I can usually, if there's not a headwind, I can hit that like circle's edge on like a 300-foot hole. That's not a problem. But in the woods, those go away for sure. Like the only thing I break out is my 9 speeds at max.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. So Brad, you can speak to this a little bit. I know for you, the Vulture, you kind of treat as your like go far disc in the moment, like for the moment, right? And the Vulture is not it's a 10-speed.
Yeah, I fluctuate between the Vulture and the Era depending on what the shot type is or what course I'm playing on. But yeah, I'm leaning heavily on those 10-speed discs for like my quote unquote distance drivers, my max distance, just because they're with them being a little slower speed for a distance driver, kind of on that bottom end. I feel like and they're still stable enough for me to hit them with enough power, and I have a little bit of an Anheuser release, so I can really hit them. I feel like they go far for me because they sort of match my arm speed compared to like even I was throwing the Hades for a long time as my max distance, but I can throw the Era or the Vulture farther than I could my Hades because of that reason.
Right. And
Awesome.
I've got so the Vanish is, if I don't hyzer flip it, it's a roller. And I've actually been playing with rollers a little bit more. It's a little tough to dial in if it's flat ground and I just, I need to get around something, I'll throw it on a flat to Anheuser release, and that's usually in casual rounds. I'll do that one, but I have a natural Anheuser release as well. Robbie has seen me like roll my wrist and just yank those suckers over. So, yeah, I lean on the photon and the wave equally, just depending on usually if it's what kind of crosswind it is, and if I'm dialed in on flat releases that day. The wave is actually the thing I've gotten my farthest distance on. It just kind of popped up and just barely kept turning over, and it just sailed. And I was just like, "Is this gonna stop?"
And then the photon, are you doing any forehands with that? I know I believe Hunter likes the photon for a forehand.
I have played with it, but honestly, I don't have the arm to justify it. I know I can rely on that one. If I yank it, on an Anheuser release, it'll come back. But I honestly lean more on my Tesla for my forehand. I learned forehand on a relay. It's this guy up there is the one ace that I've gotten. And so I learned how to release decently flat with that one. So I can kind of angle that Tesla up a little bit and get it to flex out. Or I use it for a lot of just like if it needs a right hook and I can flare skip it. I've gotten kind of decent with ground play with that, as long as I don't get caught out by a stump. So yeah, Tesla is more my speed on the forehand.
Okay, so if you use the Tesla for that right hook, what's the purpose of the fireball in the bag for you?
Fireball is flex lines. Like if I have a left hook, I'll break
so
that one out.
Backhand only.
Yeah, yep. I don't really mess with that one on the forehand, just because that overhand is what messed my shoulder up, and so I actually lean more over and go for those flat releases. So about the overhand, the only overhand shot I throw is like a thumber, and that's a get out of jail card.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Okay. I respect the cautiousness to injury. I think a lot of times people can be like, well, and that's just a shot. Like I got to go for it. I know my brother is a physical therapist, and I strained one of my obliques, and I walked up and I was like, all right, Jake, I'm gonna be real with you. I'm going to throw forehands during this tournament. That's a non-option. So how do I not injure myself in the long run and still be able to throw forehands? And that didn't work out. So if you're listening and you're in the middle of an injury right now, change your game. There is a reason your body is telling you to stop doing that specific shot. Now, Justin, you have a lot of molds in your bag. We're just going to call it what it is. That is, I mean, it's a gyro thing, right? Like it is when we talked about it before, gyro discs traditionally don't beat in that much. So you kind of need to have some discs that cover a lot of slots. Walking through it, you have, I believe, if I definitely could have counted wrong, I think you have 23 discs in your bag. And the only duplicates.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was just saying this lovely Atlas bag here. It helps me bag a lot. So
it
does.
Can fit a lot in there. I tell people all the time, like one of my favorite parts about the Atlas bag is that I feel like I'm not sacrificing the number of options I have for if I was bagging like a grip bag or something like that. And it's at a third of the price, which is always fantastic. Not that we're, pushing an ad here, but they're fantastic.
Yeah,
so
I don't even know.
Yeah, you have, literally rip it. So you have 2 Envies in your bag and 2 Nomads in your bag, but those are that's the only duplicates you have. So one thing that we often preach on the show is mold minimalization gives you that subconscious confidence in your hand. Is there a moment talking through, you have a virus, you've got an insanity, you've got the signal, you have your virus, like there's or not virus, your vanish. You've got a lot of options, let's say on the high speed that turn over.
Right.
Talk to me about like, what decision making do you have to do to decide between those three, like all those discs? And are there ever moments where you feel like it's actually good that I have this many options, or are there moments where that backfires, or kind of both?
So that came into play. I really expanded my understable when my shoulder was messed up, because I didn't have that right hook. And so and also didn't have enough discs that were beat in. I mean, yeah, like MVP takes forever to beat in, it seems like. And we're in a wooded, heavily wooded area, and like it beats discs in faster around here. I do, at least, hitting first available. But yeah, that was the reason I didn't have a lot of understable at the time. I leaned more on like my stable to, like my insanities and craves and things like that. That's when I expanded those. My insanity is starting to beat in a little bit more. I'm contemplating getting another one and starting to do some mold rotations and take that vanish out. Same with the paradox. My uplink, which is the greatest mid ever made, is starting to beat in more. I'm looking to get in like maybe a soft uplink and start rotating that paradox out, because I've got more confidence in my forehand again. It's just I just had to change my bag up to accommodate that injury. So, I mean, I tried playing left hand for a little while, just like when it was first injured, to take that out, and I don't have the control to do that, honestly. So, yes, I still have times where I'm like, okay, I need to do an absolute turnover shot. Still, I'm pinched off on the right. I can't do a forehand. I will break out that signal. That is just like I can rely on that thing to turn over like sub 250 and not burn out. And so
Okay.
I still have a lot of subconscious uh, comfort with that. Um, but yeah, that's kind of where that's at. I don't trust my release angles enough, I think, is another thing. So if I knew that I had a better control over, like if I'm gonna go for an Anheuser angle, that I'm not gonna overdo it, then yeah, maybe I would break out my insanity more and not worry about, or like my crave, and not worry about that turnover angle. But I've just been working on flat release so much that I've just let the discs do the work to a fault, almost, probably.
Mm. Mm. That's, I mean, that makes sense. Like it's, I think Brad, you might be able to speak to this. Like before we started filming this podcast, you were a flat release guy through and through, and I have intentionally stretched you out of that mold. So is that something you have found in your game as well? Is like you kind of have to put in the time to try to learn those other angles if you want to expand your game?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it's definitely opened up a lot of different. There's some, and I guess just I'll put it like this as an example, but there are several holes like at the courses around here. I can think of one. It's at a course. It's called Camp Hideaway. It's always like this really tight left to right motion, and it kind of comes back to the left a little bit. Very wooded, extremely tight gap. I'd always try to throw like a forehand through there, and I wasn't great at it. But where I've been practicing these other angles and other releases, I actually threw an Anheuser putter shot, and I typically would power up to like a distance driver forehand. So very different thinking, but just having that shot, I knew I could slightly turn this disc over. It was going to come back to flat, and I knew like the power to put on it. I knew like how I needed to like even turn my body to make it good, and it's like the best shot I ever had on the hole. But I would never have thrown that if I'd not been more comfortable with these like more Anheuser release, or even some like Heiser flips with like the uplink, and even the envy. So yeah, I think the more angles you can practice, again, I don't think it's the first thing you need to practice when you start learning how to throw a disc. Again, I'm not anywhere to the place where I need to like give people that advice, but definitely practicing that flat. learning the disc how they're supposed to fly, and then manipulating the disc with the angles, I think opens up. It's like how you can play a lot of courses with like one bag versus switching out your bag for multiple courses, I think. And Robbie, you
Right.
can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, and I know, Justin, you had said like you switch your bag out pretty often, so that isn't us taking a shot at you being like, you fool, why would you do that? But I agree, like I have built my bag personally in a way that if I were to play any course blind, I would feel like I would have the shots I needed. And then you make adjustments, right? Like when you show up to a course and this is my standard bag and I'm like, oh, I'm going to be throwing a lot more distance drivers today, then perhaps it's worth, especially like I'm playing a course in November that half the holes have water carries. So I will be, and they're all distance driver water carries. So I'm not going to put as many mids in my bag that round, and I'm going to put some extra distance drivers in there because odds are I will have less discs than when I started that round. So
Right.
that's okay when you take that break or that idea, and I think you're moving the right direction. It's another really good idea to keep in mind, Justin. You've only been playing seriously for a year, so spending that first year learning flat releases is absolutely a solid way to go about it. My challenge to you in year two would be, or the last half of year two, try to work on those angles. And I mean, worst case scenario, you mentioned it before, like your kids get really excited when you throw that tilt. How much more fun is it when you go to throw that Anheuser and it either burns over into a roller that does something good or bad, or
Right.
you throw that crazy shot and they're like, oh my gosh, my dad is the greatest man ever. Like, watch out, Paul Macbeth. So,
Right.
or James Conrad. Sorry, James Conrad.
Oh,
Y'all are much more on that side. So
Jensen did just get
definitely
a
some
video
options.
of him, giving him a shout out yesterday, so it made his day.
That's awesome.
We love it.
Yeah, so I have started branching out. Two things. I've forced myself kind of into it. The other day, I went to Charlotte, and I could only carry, I think, like 10 discs with me, and I took that many because I knew I wanted to play Nevin, the championship layout, just to see. I've never had a chance to actually play a tournament course like that before, and so I didn't have my full arsenal and had to shot shape a little bit more. So that built up my confidence. And then the other thing that's been building up my confidence is Robbie's had my kids working on hyzer approaches in the backyard, sub 200. That has dialed in my approach game. And I've actually been playing with some Anheuser approaches with my more stable Envy, and like my entropy and stuff, watch them kind of float in and trying to actually match the terrain as it's coming in for a flat landing. So I'm building it up from a slower place. But yeah, trying to do the higher speed, shot shaping is still nervy for me and around.
For sure. And there is a weird amount of pressure that we put on ourselves. I don't care what environment you're playing your round in. As soon as like, boom, we're playing this 18-hole course, they're like subconsciously we just do that to ourselves as disc golfers. And I think you kind of have to play too many rounds in order for that to start going away, or just stop caring. But if you stop caring, then you won't you often don't have the desire to improve. So that's not the route that I like to push people towards. But Justin, you have a desire to improve. You spend a lot of time working on your game, spend a lot of time theorizing. When we were talking before the show, I had said to Justin, he's one of those people that I would call a disc theorist, in terms of, I have another friend in my life, Randy, who does the same thing. Like, here are the flight numbers that you've given me, disc manufacturer, but those are wrong. And here are the actual flight numbers. And they've thrown so many discs and seen so many flights that they actually do, I think, have a very intelligent mind to mapping it out. So with that, we had Brad work on your mid ranges, because, and this is, correct me if I'm wrong, Brad, we've never done something like this for trying discs, have we?
No, we've talked about how the plastics differ as far as like recommendations and what we're throwing, but as far as throwing 3 different plastics of the same disc in one episode, no, we have not done that.
Boom. So episode 24, y'all,
So,
we are evolving for you.
Yep,
Breaking
we're
new
doing it all.
ground.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was very interesting. And, you were talking about flight numbers. We know how we feel about flight numbers, but, this is, I would say for me anyway, I threw the truth for this episode. I did throw it in 3 different plastics. I threw it lucid plastic, this cool flag dye, this lucid glimmer. I don't know if you can see it, and then a fusion plastic one as well. So the flight numbers. I mean, they didn't fly like I expected them to fly. Not a bad thing, not a good thing. And they just, when I picked up the disc and looked at it, I was like, oh, these are going to be a little bit overstable. And really, for me, they weren't. They're pretty straight. So let's talk about the feel first. So as far as like the lucid plastic, I like the lucid plastic. It's like very similar to Z or Champ, something like that. It is like a little more gummy, which I tend to like for like the mid-range sort of discs. And then the Fusion's just a little bit more stiff, but still feels good. Still grippy, not slick. So I mean, as far as feel goes in the plastic, I like it. The rim depth is very shallow for my liking. That's probably my biggest complaint with this disc is I just don't feel like, I mean, I fan grip on my mid ranges. I'm trying not to do that so much. After Trevor pointed out something to me, I'm trying to do less fan gripping. Now, like from an uplink or something like that, I am, because I want that more control, less spin. I don't need as much spin. But I was burning over a Sky God. Sorry, anecdote here, and Trevor watched me throw it, and he's like, "Oh, it's because you're fan gripping it." And lo and behold, that's what it was. I power gripped it, flew like a Sky God should. So I'm trying to grow and learn too from everybody. Anyway, rim depth is very shallow here. I can't. It just, I don't know. It doesn't feel great. It doesn't feel bad. It just doesn't feel great. I probably wouldn't pick it. Let's talk about how these fly. So on a just flat backhand release, I didn't throw any of these forehand. I mean, honestly, I don't know that I'd probably destroy my fingers trying to throw this forehand. I just can't get my fingers. I mean, they like hang halfway over the rim here. The lucid one, so flat backhand, really just flew very straight. I mean, I expected these are mids, right? I expected to throw these like 230, 250. I mean, I was hitting the 300 mark almost every time with these. So kind of crazy. Didn't expect to throw them that far. Yeah. I don't know. It was just something about the flight of the disc. So they were pretty neutral for me, especially the lucid plastic on flat backhand. It would just go very dead straight. And what I liked about them too is I didn't feel like I had to give them like a lot of height. I didn't have to throw these like discs very high. They kind of just like they would stay low for me and go really far. They stayed in the air. So sorry, like Alexa's going off here in the background because Connor's trying to kill me. So lucid backhand flat is just going very straight, about 300 feet, and then if it didn't stay dead straight when it landed, it would maybe faded a tiny bit to the left. But that's it. Just very, very straight flying disc. Now, I don't know if this is this particular truth, but this lucid truth definitely went very straight on flat backhand. Glimmer, it was almost the same flight. I would say it was more overstable though. So it would probably fade another 20, 30 feet to the left, but not super overstable. And then the Fusion, this actually was flying a little bit flippy for me. Like it would turn a little bit when it came out of my hand. Again, I have a little bit of an Anheuser release naturally, so let's just take that into account. But it definitely would land more straight to right for me when I was throwing this on flat backhand. Heiser backhand, really same. If you just take the exact same kind of flight that I gave you, it just kept that line. Again, it didn't want it to like crash and Heiser out on me. It just would kind of keep the line that I gave it. Now this Glimmer Truth, it was a little bit more overstable, so it did want to get to the ground a little quicker versus the Lucid and definitely the Fusion. Now the Fusion isn't so flippy that I could flip it up to flat and turn or anything like that, but it would kind of pop up like slightly. You could tell it wanted to pop up, but it wouldn't quite get there. Like my arm couldn't quite get it to pop up fully, but again, just kept the line that it went. On the Heiser angle, I mean, the Glimmer one went about 275. It wouldn't quite push that 300 mark, but I still could get the Lucid and the Fusion to go very close to that 300 mark every time. And again, just take the first example and move them all a little to the left. They just kind of kept the hyzer angle the whole time. Anhyzer, very interesting. Now, these discs were not, again, looking at the flight numbers, just like off the shelf, I've never thrown a truth before. It's a 5502. So I'd expect to be able to maybe like give it a little, like throw a little flex line with these. Wasn't as, I'm sure you could if you had more skill, maybe. Probably this is one of those scenarios, Robbie, correct me if I'm wrong, where a more skilled player would take a truth and maybe power down a little bit to get the flex angle because it would become more stable, I suppose. I don't know. Still learning here. But for me on the Anheuser angle, I could give them a little Annie and they would like all turn a little bit and come back really to straight. Except the fusion, it like obviously wanted to turn a little bit more. But if I gave it too much Anheuser, they would all become very flippy and they would turn over on me, every one of them. So definitely, I don't think for me, not a like a turn like an Anheuser shot per se, because they kind of, if I gave them a tiny bit of Anheuser, most of them would turn a little bit, especially the Lucid and the Fusion. But that big Annie angle, they would kind of burn over on me. So, and again, roughly same distance, probably the Anheuser was a little bit more tricky to get the angle right. Probably that 250, 275 range is where they were landing for me. Again, and like I said, I didn't throw any of these on forehand. I wouldn't throw these on forehand personally, especially now, not saying you couldn't, but for me, it's just not going to work. Overall, I was really happy. Jason was actually out in the field throwing with me. He usually joins me for field work. But I told him I really wish this was different because I really loved how this disc flies. I wish it felt differently. It was very uncomfortable to throw. My hands hurt afterward. Again, just because like you can see how crunched they are in here. Like there's like no rim for me to grab on. But I think at the end of the day, the truth, if you add some rim depth to this, it's really the Nebula, which everyone knows I love my Nebula. So it flies very similar for me. So that's probably why. But I love this Lucid one in particular. Like I was like debating on the way home from the field. I'm like, can I back this Lucid Truth? Because could I get over the hand feel? Like, would I just get used to it? Because truthfully, it was very, very, very neutral for me, and it went really far. It was like, to me, like this is the river of mid ranges. Like it just, I felt it flew very similar to the river, and the fact that I felt like there was times in the flight I'm like, okay, it's gonna fade out now. It's gonna drop out of the sky, and it just kept going. So overall, good disc. What's really cool is I kind of do this same method in my bag, which is the different plastics, trying to like cover different stabilities, but the same mold. So I have that conscious or subconscious confidence that you referred to and Robbie talks about all the time. So like Jackalope, I have in a couple different plastics. I have zones in different plastics. I have the Era in different plastic now that they have the composite that's a little bit more stable. So this is interesting, and I think Robbie has said this before. I think it's a cool, a challenging thing for someone who's inventorying and purchasing Trilogy because I have so many plastic types for their molds. But the positive thing is that gives you a lot of options off of one mold. So I think that, and I know Rob is going to dive more into that, but I'm looking in your bag and I look at like the hex and the reactor for sure, and even maybe like Pyro's pretty overstable, but even the reactor and hex spot, and even maybe that signal, kind of what you're wanting your signal to do, I think the truth or something like the truth could really fit that entire section of your bag, but you'd have one mold doing it different plastics versus having to, and that's the thing. If you lose that, like that hex that you love, you probably can find a replacement, but having the truth, like just say during a round, but having the truth in the bag, it might be, if you lost one of your truth, your other ones fly pretty similar. You could probably manipulate that one a little bit to fly like your other ones versus trying to like figure out how a reactor is going to fly like your hex. So that's what I have today, Robbie.
Yeah. And I think that, so just for clarification for people listening, because when it comes to the truth mold in general, you have to clarify just a tiny bit. So he threw EMAC truths.
I'm sorry, yeah, EMAC truth.
So, because the actual truth does exist, and it is an understable version of the EMAC truth. So a fun thing about the EMAC Truth, and we may have even talked about this on the podcast before, is that so they had the Truth, and EMAC being Eric McCabe, who has part ownership at DD. For those of you who are like, why is it called an EMAC Truth? I never assume intelligence, or like intelligence is probably the wrong word. I never assume like
knowledge,
background knowledge. Yeah. So I apologize. I didn't mean to offend you, podcast listeners. That background knowledge. So when they tried to retool the EMAC Truth and make it like what it is, they messed up and made it too overstable. Eric threw it and was like, that is a super cool disc. We should keep that disc. And that is what the Verdict is. So the Verdict, if you pick up a Verdict and you pick up an EMAC Truth, they are going to feel incredibly similar. And that's because they basically were designed to be the same disc. It's just the overstable version. So I tell people all the time, if you fall in love with the EMAC Truth in this slot, Justin, then if you want that pyro type flight, you can move up to a Verdict and have the Verdict flight out of that. And then they have, just like they have the EMAC Truth and a billion plastics, surprise, surprise, the Verdict comes in a billion plastics too. So like they have Lucid Glimmer Verdicts that to me fly like the deflector that you have in your bag. Like it is just trying to get to the ground. So
then you have 2 molds covering basically 5 or 6 molds that you have currently.
Yeah. So super interesting. And Justin, for listeners, you might be like, so why do we go with the EMAC Truth? Well, A, all of the like plastic variety is a thing, but B, Justin actually has a Lucid EMAC Truth. So we knew that was the baseline. So Brad, my question to you is, as a disc that we want to send Justin to have him try out, between the Fusion and the Lucid Chameleon or Lucid Glimmer, which of those do you feel like offers more shot shaping variety or like more options out of the gate?
I think for Justin specifically, I'm thinking the Fusion. And the only reason I'm thinking the Fusion is because you're already like you have a lot of stuff in kind of like that neutral to like slightly understable category. I think that's like a nice starting point for you. It's going to kind of live in that like hex signal category for you and maybe start to push those down. And you already have the Lucid one, which is pretty straight. So maybe that's going to live in that hex reactor, like right between those two. So it's going to be a nice way for you to start to build that out. And then if you decide you like that mold, then you can just add that Lucid Glimmer in there as well. And then you have a slightly more stable version of that. So I think the Fusion's probably where I would go, Robbie. I think it really is going to fit in like a already existing gap and start to close those molds down.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Justin,
on that.
what do you think about all that?
I think this one is the Glimmer just that it's got a bunch of like glitter in there. Is that what that is? So yeah, I think mine's actually a Glimmer, which kind of gives it even more of a gap.
That changes my mind.
Oh, does it?
That changes my, well, maybe not. This Lucid one is very, 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 very straight. So again, how's your hex flying? Is it like extremely straight for you?
That particular hex is pretty new, that new fission. So it has a bit of a finish to it. It's almost too similar to my reactor right now, because that reactor is starting to get a little beat in.
Okay.
So there's a lot of overlap there. So I'd like something that kind of sits a little bit farther, like closer to a pyro, or like a matrix kind of, because I was actually thinking about trying to swap out that reactor for a matrix just to give it that little more stability. But at any rate, so yeah, I think this Glimmer will fit that, and then it will eventually beat in a little bit more, and then try that Fusion. I still think might be the way to go, because that would kind of fit that where my uplink used to be at, because it's gotten pretty flippy now.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Then that makes more sense. If that hex is a fission and it's flying a little bit more, has a little stable finish to it, then yeah, I still agree. Then we'll go with the Fusion.
Perfect. So Justin, would you be willing to come back on after you tried this one out for a little bit?
Absolutely.
Dude, awesome. Well, Justin, we want to say thanks for coming on, man. Thanks for being a part of the show. And we are looking forward to you discovering the truth of Eric McCabe and coming back and sharing your findings with us, man. So look forward to having you on a future episode.
All right, man. We appreciate it,
guys. Thanks.
See ya.
Man, I will admit, when you were describing it, Brad, I really thought you might take him in the direction of the Lucid Glimmer. So I agree. I'm pumped to see him throw that fusion.
Yeah, I think it's just gonna give him. He has the the Lucid Glimmer, and then he has the Fusion. So they're kind of like the ends of the spectrum. If he likes those, then I think the Lucid one will go right in the middle. So, yeah, definitely excited to hear his feedback. And again, I wish I loved the feel of the Truth more. I loved how it flew. Loved it. So there's disc for everybody. That one was just not for me, I guess.
Yeah, and that's a good truth. Like if you, pun intended.
Get it.
If you're not finding something you like, always shop around and see, because the beauty of there being so many discs and the fact that there are so many of you listening who are not sponsored, go try other molds, go try other brands. You don't have to be super brand loyal. I guarantee you that the moment that you drop brand loyalty, you will probably see an increase in your game, because you're going to start finding discs that are better for your game.
Yep, living proof of that for sure. And I still don't have any trilogy in my bag. It's just I haven't found like the disc. I had the diamond for a while, but as like my form was getting a little bit better, they got a little too flippy for me. But I loved it. It just kind of just worked its way out of my bag. So looking forward to trying some more trilogy plastic. Hopefully in the next couple episodes we can do that.
Dude, absolutely. But speaking of like branching out and finding new plastic, what's new in the warehouse?
So we actually finally finished getting all of our new Discraft inventory up. So there's like some molds and some plastics we haven't had in a while. I mean, there's some, we still have some Get Freaky zones left, surprisingly. So like check out those. There's Passion restock. We're restocking all of our ESP, and we're doing pictures of every disc. So make sure you check those out. I believe, probably by the time of this episode, they shipped out yesterday. We're going to have the new, Diamondback, which is a new mold from Mint, coming out. It's supposed to be a very straight fairway driver, so I'm excited to throw that one. That's going to be great. And
Should be a nice compliment to your jackalope.
Yeah, exactly. I'm hoping it just like kind of carries over into that same area. So looking forward to throwing that one. Innova, like all of our stock Innova is there. We have some cool Tour Series stuff that's just always is getting revamped and put in there. Got some Condors in. If any Condor fans out there, make sure you check those out. So a lot of new stuff's going up every day. Check the recently restocked tab that we have now. That's just to keep everybody ahead of what we're putting up and what's new and coming on the website. So if you haven't checked out any of the classic Foundation or the vintage collection from Foundation, check that out too. Those are pretty sweet. Can't wait to get mine in. So
come on with it. Well, y'all, we are always grateful to Foundation Discs. Make sure you heading over to Foundation Discs and purchasing plastic from them obviously helps support the podcast, what we're doing here, so we can keep bringing on guests. And we have a super special guest for next week. So y'all go ahead and get hyped. We actually are getting a little bit of an exclusive, because this guest is going to be talking about something that's coming out, and I'm pretty confident we are the first people that first podcast talking about it. So
yep, I think so too. I can't wait to have this person on, and really excited. And hey, by the way, thanks to everybody that purchased the Robbie C patches from Atlas. There's still some left, so we'll link those in the description as well. You can get $1 off with in the bag as a promo code. So
come on with it. So we appreciate y'all. And whether you're trying your truth, whether you hate the truth, we always want to remember, if it's good,
keep in the bag. We'll see y'all next week. Thank you.